Oh, thank you, Walter, and thank you, Jennifer, and welcome all. I suspect that some of you are as weary as I am, because I suspect that many of you stayed up until all hours of the night watching the returns from Texas. What a year, what a night, what a season. This is something that, this is something that we've never seen before. Not just the late stage at which decisions are being made as far as the Democratic nominee goes. But we've never before been at this place where we have two people, one of whom will be the nominee of a major party, who claim to be children, both of whom claim to be children of the dream. And that's interesting in many respects, and it's interesting also because of what we're talking about tonight, because presidential candidates, presidents historically, have not really focused, for the most part, a whole lot on civil rights. Going back to the founding of this great nation and the years following that, we certainly had people who spoke out and presidents who spoke out against the slave trade, though most accepted it. And none really took seriously the words of the Declaration of Independence about all men being created equal, and none really seriously entertained that women might be equal to men as well. That changed, of course, with Abraham Lincoln. Along with Abraham Lincoln, we got the Civil War, we got the Emancipation Proclamation and freedom for the former slaves, we got the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. We got a raft of civil rights legislation to support those amendments. And that period of time, you call it, I suppose you could call it the first civil rights presidency in some respects. And that period of time was not very long because followed by that era, we got the Compromise of 1877, we got the end of Reconstruction, we got the rise of Jim Crow, and we got a more than 80-year drought before another piece of civil rights legislation passed the Congress. Which is not to say that nothing happened in those years. There was, of course, women's suffrage, for one thing. And it's interesting to note that Woodrow Wilson, who was a firm supporter of women getting the right to vote, was also a firm supporter of racial segregation. We had Herbert Hoover, who did speak out against lynching, but he didn't really speak out against the system that made lynching a sport for Southern segregationists. And then, of course, we got Harry Truman, and things changed a bit. In the wake of the Civil War, Harry Truman desegregated the armed forces by executive order. And he also convened a presidential commission, a committee, that for the first time seriously wrestled with the question of equality as a proposition and as a reality for this nation. He was followed, of course, by Eisenhower, who had no choice, really, but to deal with civil rights. There was something called Brown v. Board, a big Supreme Court decision that came along on his watch, and which subsequently led to the crises in Little Rock, which led him to call in federal troops, of course. And he oversaw, or at least contributed to, actually, the passage of the first civil rights legislation, as I said, in over 8 decades, which was the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which was a relatively weak Voting Rights Act, made weaker by the Congress, and interesting to note, in the Senate at that time were both LBJ and JFK. Which brings me to my first question, and the panel has already been introduced, so I won't spend much time introducing them other than just acknowledge that they're here, and to say that there is a biography, I understand, in the program, which will give you more details on both on their esteemed records in academia and in the world of letters We have, of course, Taylor Branch, who is one of the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and one of the most distinguished writers in the United States. And we have Kathleen Sullivan, former dean of Stanford and a legal scholar of renown, and as Jennifer mentioned, her former law professor. And the first question will go to you, Taylor. I'll read you a couple of things which you'll recognize. To King, we're talking about the 1957 Civil Rights Bill here. To King, the lesson of the bill was that Negroes should place less reliance on white institutions and take more responsibility upon themselves. This comes from Parting the Waters. Next quote. This is a comment made by Hillary Clinton on Fox News. I will point to the fact that Dr. King's dream began to be realized when President Johnson passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, when he was able to get through Congress something that President Kennedy was hopeful to do. The president before had not even tried, but it took a president to get it done. That dream became a reality. The power of the dream became real in people's lives because we had a president who said, we are going to do it and actually get it accomplished. What changed between 1957, when King essentially has concluded that you can't rely on, to use the words, white institutions, and 1964, when the Civil Rights Act passed? And how do you think the relative importance of the president and other outside actors when it comes to getting civil rights on the national agenda?
Well, I guess that's the heart of the plate. That's a great question. First of all, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here with Kathleen and with you, Ellis, and this wonderful institution, the cooperative institution dealing with ideas. So without further ado, ideas. What changed is that the whole country was mobilized slowly, painfully, steadily, but persistently by the civil rights movement out on the streets to take charge and set the public agenda rather than simply waiting for people to do things up in Washington.